Humans single-handedly turned the tide and won a bloodbath of a war, but instead of gratitude, the Galactic Council decided humans were too dangerous to ever fight again. Anthony Reyes kicked open the shattered doors, the barrel of his plasma rifle still smoking, as he picked his way through the ruins of the once grand Galactic Council chamber on the Evora homeworld. Half the massive domed structure had crumbled into twisted heaps of metal and glass when his strike team blasted their way in. Stray rounds had punched holes in the wall friezes depicting ancient Everans clasping appendages with a dozen other alien species, laughable propaganda considering how eagerly those same species had turned on each other. Uko, the elderly Evora High Counselor, emerged from the rubble, long ceremonial robes tattered and scorched. His eyes flashed as he caught sight of Anthony. "Are you proud of what you've done, human?" Uko spat, sweeping an arm to encompass the destruction. "This is why your kind can never again be allowed to fight in our wars." Anthony rested his weapon on his shoulder, barking a humorless laugh. "Damn right I'm proud. We did what we had to do to protect ourselves and end this conflict for good. If that meant tearing down your rotten, corrupt institution, then so be it." "So humans are all the same," Uko hissed. "Violent, uncontrollable, destructive. The Council was right to restrict your participation after the Vensari incident." The mere mention of Vensari made Anthony's finger twitch on the trigger. He surged forward, jabbing a finger against Uko's chest. "Don't act like you're innocent in all this," he snarled. "Your people started that war, and then you practically begged us to bail you out once you realized you were losing. Humans bled and died by the millions for you. But the second we started winning a little too decisively for your liking, you changed your tune real quick." He jerked his head toward the friezes depicting Evora cooperation. What a load of shit. After everything humanity sacrificed, the Galactic Council stabbed them in the back over ethical concerns as soon as the war no longer benefited the ruling species. They'd pulled humans from the front lines, slapped them with sanctions and arms embargoes, and expected them to sit back and watch their hard-won progress crumble. Well, they'd underestimated human grit and ingenuity. Anthony had made damn sure of that. His strike force executed a series of devastating raids to cripple the enemy war machine and force the Council's hand. Now, all that remained was to dictate humanity's terms before the armistice. Anthony raised his rifle and motioned for Uko to get moving. The Council would finally answer for decades of using humans as cannon fodder one moment and fearing their potential the next. It was time to show the galaxy what happens when you fuck with Earth. 15 years earlier, a younger Anthony stepped aboard the UNS Indefatigable with an extra bounce in his stride. Fresh out of officer training, he was ready to prove himself and earn some glory. This human frigate and the eager new ensign were joining the Allied fleet to push back the invading Zorak Empire. Anthony could barely contain his excitement as he reported for duty. Fighting alongside the Council races, the supposed guardians of galactic peace felt like a just and noble cause. But that idealism faded as the war ground on, chewing up human lives and ships at a sickening rate. Again and again, Council fleets charged into the Zorak meat grinder with inflexible, unimaginative tactics. Skilled human crews were squandered as cannon fodder in ill-conceived offensives. The Council treated its human allies as expendable assets rather than equals. These simmering tensions boiled over at Vensari. In the heat of battle, with the Zoraks pressing their advantage, the Council Admiral demanded the human ships sacrifice themselves in a suicidal diversionary charge to buy time for the Council forces to regroup and counterattack. Anthony stood on the bridge of the Indefatigable, knuckles white as he gripped the tactical console, watching the argument play out on the comms. His captain flatly refused the order, instead leading the human contingent in a risky but brilliant flanking maneuver. The bold move worked, catching the Zoraks off guard. The humans had turned the tide and delivered a decisive victory. But there was no celebration from their allies, only recrimination. Anthony overheard the livid Council Admiral berating his captain, calling the insubordination evidence that humans were too reckless and uncontrollable to be trusted. He demanded the captain be court-martialed for disobeying orders. The captain shot back, his voice tight with barely contained fury. If they'd gone along with the Admiral's asinine plan, the battle would have been lost and the human fleet destroyed. He accused the council of prizing unquestioned obedience over sound strategy and actually winning the damn war. Anthony felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. He was getting a glimpse behind the curtain, seeing the deep fractures in this supposed alliance of equals. The council didn't view humanity as a partner, but as a tool, one they didn't fully trust and feared to see become too strong. That seed of bitter revelation would take root over the coming years, growing into the thorny defiance that led him to turn his guns on the council itself. The war dragged on for 5 more grueling years. The council, unsettled by the growing clout of human forces after stunning victories like Vensari, started to deliberately sideline Earth's ships and soldiers. Human fleets found themselves increasingly relegated to secondary fronts and tedious garrison duty on unimportant border worlds, far from the main action against the Zoraks. Lieutenant Anthony Reyes punched the bulkhead of the cramped ready room in frustration, leaving a fist-sized dent in the cheap metal. He paced like a caged animal, his boots ringing on the deck grating. This was bullshit. He and his fellow human crews were going stir-crazy, patrolling empty stretches of space day after day, while the Council fumbled the crucial campaign against the Zorak Empire. Another pointless patrol, Anthony growled to his squad. While the real war is happening light years away without us, the Council is squandering us out here in the void, and for what? Because they're too proud and paranoid to let humans fight where it actually matters. His squad grumbled their agreement. They were all seasoned vets now, not the fresh-faced recruits of 5 years ago. They'd proven themselves over and over, but the Council kept holding them back. A klaxon blared through the outpost, an emergency transmission coming in. Anthony rushed to the comm station, but Commander Zelix, the Thraxi officer in charge of the outpost, was already there. I repeat, this is Council Fleet Sigma 9. A panicked voice burst from the speakers, lasers and explosions in the background. We are under heavy Zorak assault in the Kepler system. They've flanked us. We can't hold them. Taking heavy losses. Need immediate reinforcement. Can anyone hear us? Kepler, Anthony blurted out. That's only a few jumps from here. We can reach them in time. We have to... Zelix cut him off with a sharp click of his mandibles. Negative, Lieutenant. Kepler is outside our designated patrol sector. Fleet Command has not cleared us to leave our post. We will monitor the situation, but take no action at this time. Are you serious? Anthony demanded, not believing his ears. Our allies are dying out there. Who cares about patrol sectors? We have ships and guns. Let's use them. The Thraxi's compound eyes narrowed. I do not have time to debate military protocol with a junior officer. You have your orders, Lieutenant. Back to your post now. Zelix turned back to the comms, ignoring Anthony's balled fists and gritted teeth. The human lieutenant stormed from the command center, a crazy idea already taking shape. Like hell he was going to sit here while people died. It was time for another Vensari. Council regulations be damned. He slammed open the door to the ready room, making his squad jump to attention. Screw orders and screw the Council. Gear up, people. We're doing this. Let's go save some lives. In a frantic scramble of determination and defiance, Anthony's squad suited up in record time. Hearts pounding, they piled into their fighters and tore out of the outpost hangar. Zelix's enraged voice blasted over comms demanding they return immediately, but Anthony cut the channel. No more words, time for action. The human ships, a bare handful against the might of a Zorak assault force, knifed into the Kepler system with guns blazing. The Zoraks had the battered Council fleet dead to rights, but the sudden arrival of angry humans threw their neat formation into chaos. Lances of plasma fire lit the void as Anthony and his squad dueled the enemy interceptors. A savage melee ensued, the humans fighting with desperate ferocity to reach the Council ships before the Zoraks could finish them off. One by one, Anthony's friends winked out in bursts of flame around him. The losses tore at his heart, but he flew on, determined to make their sacrifices mean something. At last, Anthony's fighter shuddered through the Zorak screen and reached the Council fleet. His blood ran cold, seeing how few ships remained. Sigma 9 had been decimated before they arrived, only a handful of stricken cruisers and frigates still struggling to survive. "Attention Council Fleet Sigma 9, Anthony broadcast on all frequencies. "This is Lieutenant Reyes of Earth. We'll cover your retreat, but you need to go now. Get your people out of here." A Zorak battleship swung its terrible bulk towards the Council remnants, the glow of a spinal railgun powering up along its length. Anthony didn't hesitate, gunning his engines and diving to place his fighter between the injured Council ships and the looming dreadnought. The railgun fired, a lance of blinding light that skewered Anthony's fighter through the cockpit. Warnings screamed and emergency lights flashed red. Anthony's world dissolved into pain, the breath driven from his lungs by the force of the impact. He struggled to keep his eyes open, to keep his hands on the controls. Just a few more seconds. Stay together. Just a few more seconds. Behind him, the last Council ships limped into FTL and vanished. The humans had bought them the time they needed. The job was done. Anthony stared through a haze of his own blood at the Zorak battleship, looming in his cracked view screen. He bared his teeth in a defiant grin. "Choke on it, you bastards." He overrode the safety controls and detonated his fighter's reactor. A miniature sun blossomed in the darkness of the Kepler system, the explosion tearing a molten hole in the flank of the Zorak warship. The battered human ships limped back into the outpost hangar, trailing smoke and leaking atmosphere. Anthony was not among them, just a single empty bunk and a locker full of whiskey to mark his passing. In the aftermath, the Council crews they'd saved hailed the human pilots as heroes. They spoke of the valor of Lieutenant Anthony Reyes, how he'd sacrificed himself to buy them time to escape. Tales spread far and wide of human bravery and skill, Anthony's name becoming a rallying cry. But Commander Zelix and the Council told a different story. They spoke of dangerous insubordination, of a mutiny that had cost valuable ships and crews. Charges were filed against Anthony's surviving squadmates, trials convened in secret. The tribunal showed no mercy. These human upstarts had flagrantly defied orders and taken ships into an unauthorized battle. It didn't matter that they'd saved lives. All that mattered was that they'd broken the chain of command, a threat to Council authority that could not be tolerated. In a final message before being hauled away to the Tartarus military prison, Anthony's pilots swore to keep fighting in his memory, to expose the Council's lies. One day, they promised each other in whispers and furtive datapad messages the alliance would fracture. The Council's chains on humanity would break. Anthony Reyes had lit a spark. Now it was up to them to fan it into an inferno that would burn the corrupt Council to ashes. The Tartarus military prison gates slammed shut behind Anthony, with a final damning clang. He stepped out into watery sunlight, squinting against the glare, his eyes unaccustomed to anything brighter than a cell's naked bulb after a decade locked away. The once proud lieutenant was thinner, paler, his dark hair now streaked with premature grey, but the fire in his eyes, banked to embers through long years of confinement, still smouldered. Anthony made his way through the bustling spaceport, ignored by the crowds. Just another haggard ex-con among thousands, unremarkable. But as he boarded a shuttle bound for Earth, he couldn't help but notice the changes. Council soldiers seemed to be everywhere, standing guard on every corner, checking papers at every checkpoint. The few human travelers scurried by with downcast eyes, second-class citizens in what should have been their own territory. Anger rose in Anthony's throat, hot and acrid. This was not the future he'd sacrificed for. He'd rotted in Tartarus for the sake of human dignity and freedom, only to emerge and find his people more shackled than ever. The week-long journey to Earth only sharpened his bitter fury. Every space station, every transit hub, drove home humanity's diminished status, Council ships docking in the best berths, while human vessels were shunted off to dilapidated peripheries. Alien merchants did brisk business in the markets while human shopkeepers hawked their wares from shabby storefronts. By the time his shuttle touched down on the cracked tarmac of JFK Interstellar, Anthony's teeth were clenched so hard, his jaw ached. He'd been a soldier, not a politician, but he understood power, and on Earth power now clearly rested in alien hands. The Council had tightened its grip, and humanity was being slowly strangled. In the days that followed, Anthony walked the grimy streets and listened in grim silence as his fellow humans poured out their pain and anger in cramped, smoke-filled rooms. Some spoke of organizing strikes and protests, others of stockpiling weapons for an insurgency. The most extreme voices called for all-out war, a final desperate bid to throw off the Council's yoke, no matter the cost. Part of Anthony, the part that still woke sweat-soaked from dreams of blood and void fire, was tempted. The Council had stolen his youth, his honor, his faith in the institutions he'd once served. The vindictive urge to make them pay, to storm their halls with rifle and grenade, and leave none standing, pulsed like a drum behind his eyes. But the colder, wiser part of him, the part that had endured a decade of imprisonment with patience and cunning, knew that path led only to ruin. Humanity was outgunned and divided. To rebel now would be suicide, inviting the Council to tighten its grip from subjugation to outright slavery, or worse, to decide that humanity was more trouble than it was worth, and take steps to permanently neutralize the threat. No, open war was not the answer, not yet, but neither could humanity continue in meek subservience to alien overlords. A new path was needed, a middle way between submission and self-destruction. The idea came to Anthony in the grey pre-dawn hours, as he lay sleepless on a lumpy mattress in a cheap hostel. The Council's power rested on the legitimacy granted by its member species, on the illusion of a great galactic alliance. So what if that alliance began to crack? What if humanity simply opted out? Not a violent rebellion, but a quiet withdrawal. A refusal to participate in Council institutions, to fight in Council wars, to trade Council goods. Let humanity turn inward, tend to its own needs and development, and have no more to do with the tangled intrigues and power plays of aliens. See how long the Council's smug dominance lasted, without human ships to fill its fleets and human taxes to fill its coffers. In the morning, Anthony began to speak, to argue for this new isolationism, at first in small private gatherings, then in public speeches and broadsheet editorials. His reputation as the hero of Kepler, unjustly imprisoned, drew crowds and lent his words weight. The movement spread from Earth to the colonies until the Council could no longer ignore it. Their response was as swift as it was predictable. Sanctions on human worlds, a block on human ships at Council-controlled jump gates, and a blunt threat that any attempt to withdraw from the alliance would be met with military force. The Council had grown used to humanity's leash and would not let it slip from their grasp without a fight. Across human space, anger boiled and fists clenched. For a breathless moment, the galaxy teetered on the brink, humanity and the Council staring each other down like gunslingers, waiting to see who would draw first. Anthony held his breath, wondering if his gambit for peace would be the spark that ignited a war. And then a miracle, or perhaps a disaster depending on one's perspective. News reached Earth of a massive Zorak assault on the Evora homeworld, the great ringed capital of the Council itself. The Zorak had struck with overwhelming force, shattering perimeter defenses and landing invasion forces on the planet's surface. The Council, long grown complacent behind the shield of human ships and lives, suddenly found its heart exposed and its sword arm half a galaxy away. In panicked haste, the Council recalled its far-flung fleets, leaving its frontier systems and subject worlds stripped bare of protection, including the human colonies, now suddenly free of immediate Council threat. Humanity stood at a crossroads. One path led to the Council's aid, to send human ships and soldiers racing to the defense of Evora in desperate hope of earning back the Council's favor, regaining some scrap of status and influence in the halls of alien power. The other path led to a different future, to turn their backs on the Council in its hour of need, to seize this moment of weakness and at last break free, charting an independent course for human destiny. In frantic hollow conferences and parliament sessions, the debate raged. Hardliners demanded humanity abandon the council to its fate, taking a vicious satisfaction in the irony. More cautious voices warned that the Zorak were a tide that would drown them all if not turned back now. Through it all, Anthony fought to forge a third option. He took to the stage, to the airwaves, to every platform he could command. "Send our fleets to defend our own worlds," he urged, "but not one ship, not one life for Evora. This is not our war." "The Council will never forget such a betrayal," his opponents argued. "They will make us pay." Anthony's eyes flashed. "Then let us make them pay for our loyalty. We have bled for them, died for them, and our reward has been chains and condescension. No more. We will help them, but on our terms, as equals, and if they will not treat us as equals, then we will let them stand alone." It was a precarious balance, pragmatic yet bold, and it threaded the needle between the divided human factions. Consensus formed. Humanity would engage the Zorak only so far as needed to secure human space, and use that leverage to demand a new, fairer relationship with the Council. Neither overlords and subjects nor outright enemies, but powers in their own right, sovereign and strong. As human ships mobilized, and the first battles lit the skies over human worlds, Anthony traveled to neutral ground to a tense summit with Councillor Uko, his old adversary. For days they clashed, trading barbs and demands, old wounds and new grievances thick between them. But as the war ground on and the Zorak pressed their advantage, battering at the gates of Evora itself, the haggard councillor at last bowed to necessity. Humanity would have its new accord, nominal autonomy, council seats of its own, limits on alien forces in human space. A fraction of the true sovereignty Anthony dreamed of, but a start, a foundation to build upon. The agreement was signed, and the bulk of the human fleet advanced, drawing Zorak ships away from the beleaguered Evora, buying time for the council races to rally. The war would be long and bloody still, but now at least the Allies stood on more equal footing. On the observation deck of his flagship, Anthony watched the stars drift by, feeling the weight of the moment stretch across light years. The future was uncertain, the new peace tenuous. There would be a reckoning for the Council's treatment of humanity, a price to be paid in trust and power, and scars that might never fully heal. But for now there was a chance, however slim, for something better to rise from the ashes of the old order, a new balance, a new hope. And Anthony would do all he could to seize it, for the sake of all the lives spent and the sacrifices yet to come. The ship hummed around him, the distant thunder of guns echoing through its hull. A war still raged, a story still unfinished, but a new chapter had begun. Anthony stood on the bridge of his flagship, hands clasped tightly behind his back as he stared at the holodisplay. A massive Zorak fleet had just emerged from the void, appearing with stomach-lurching suddenness above Earth. Alarms blared through the ship. Crewmen raced to battle stations. "How?" Anthony growled. "How did they get so close without us detecting them?" His sensor officer, pale and wide-eyed, shook her head. "Unknown, sir. They must have some new cloaking technology." Anthony slammed a fist on the console. It had all been a ruse. The Zorak's sudden offensive on the Council homeworld, the frantic peace negotiations, all of it designed to draw attention away from Earth, leaving it vulnerable. On the display, the Zorak ships opened fire, lances of plasma raining down on the blue-green marble of humanity's cradle. Cities burned. Millions died in an instant. "Sir," the comms officer called out, "incoming transmission from Councillor Uko." The Thrax's image flickered to life, his expression grave. "Commander Reyes, the Council fleet is still days away. You must hold the line until we arrive." Anthony barked a humorless laugh. "With what ships? You've stripped our defenses bare." "I warned you this would happen," Uko hissed. "Your human belligerence has brought this upon us all. If you engage the Zorak now, the Council will consider it an act of war." Rage surged through Anthony's veins, hot and potent. All the years of swallowed pride, the simmering resentment, It all crystallized into a cold, clear purpose. He cut the transmission with a flick of his hand. To hell with the Council and their threats. Earth was burning. His people were dying. There was no choice here, no decision to be made. There was only the last desperate charge, the final defiant stand. He opened a fleet-wide channel. "This is Commander Reyes. All human ships engage the enemy. Defend Earth at all costs. We stand alone." A ragged cheer went up from his crew as the human fleet surged forward, guns blazing. They were outnumbered, outgunned, an ant trying to fight a boot. But they were human, and they would make the Zorak bleed for every inch of their homeworld. The battle was joined, a swirling melee of flashing beams and shattered hulls. Anthony's ship shuddered and groaned as it traded blows with Zorak cruisers. Consoles exploded in showers of sparks, bulkheads buckled, the dead and dying littered the decks. But even as his ship fell to ruin around him, Anthony felt a grim sense of satisfaction. They were making the Zorak pay dearly for their treachery. The alien ships were taking losses, their tight formations falling into chaos under the ferocity of the human assault. And then a miracle. A second human fleet, the system defense forces that had been out on patrol, came racing out of FTL, catching the Zorak from behind. The aliens found themselves suddenly pinned between two human fronts, a hammer and anvil of vengeful human fury. The Zorak line broke, their ships scattering like leaves before a hurricane. Cheers rang out across the human fleet. Against all odds, against all expectation, they had won. They had saved Earth. But the victory was short-lived. As the last Zorak ships fled, the Council fleet finally arrived, a vast armada that filled the skies. At its head was Uko's flagship, a massive dreadnought bristling with guns. A warning shot sizzled across Anthony's bow, a searing streak of light that left glowing scars on his ship's hull. Uko's voice boomed across the comms, cold and imperious. "Human fleet, stand down immediately. By engaging in unauthorized military action, you have violated the terms of the peace agreement. Surrender now or be destroyed." Anthony stared at the Council ships, his heart heavy with bitter realization. They had played right into the Council's hands. By defending themselves, by saving their world, they had given the Council the perfect excuse to finally neuter humanity's military might, once and for all. Around him, the human ships hung in space, battered and depleted, but still proud, still unbroken. He thought of all they had sacrificed, all they had endured, the years of condescension and subjugation, the lives lost to the Council's callous disregard. A part of him, the angry, defiant part, wanted to give the order to fight on, to go down swinging, to make the Council pay for every drop of human blood. But the wiser part, the part that had endured a decade in prison and understood the long game, knew that would be folly. Earth was already in ruins. The human fleet was in shambles. To fight now would not be valiant sacrifice, but senseless suicide. And it would give the Council the justification they needed to strip humanity of even the faintest hope of future resistance. No. To salvage anything from this disaster, to preserve any chance of humanity one day reclaiming its destiny, they needed to swallow their pride one last time, to bend so that they would not break. With a heavy heart, he gave the order. One by one, the human ships powered down their weapons and lowered their shields. One by one, they surrendered to the waiting Council fleet. In the aftermath, as the smoke cleared and the dead were tallied, the Council delivered its judgment. Humanity was to be forever banned from building armed ships or maintaining standing armies. Earth's defenses would be permanently dismantled, its war machine ground to dust. The decision was delivered not with the gloating triumph Anthony had expected, but with a kind of solemn gravity, as if the Council understood the weight of what they were doing, as if they knew that they were not just chaining humanity, but diminishing themselves in the process. In a somber ceremony broadcast across the galaxy, Anthony handed over his sidearm to Uko, a symbolic surrender of humanity's military strength. The Thraxi took it with a pained expression, as if the weapon burned his hand. "This is a dark day," Anthony said, his voice heavy with grief and regret. "In your fear you have crippled your greatest ally. You may have peace, but it will be the peace of the grave, a galaxy undefended and vulnerable." Uko said nothing, his eyes haunted. In the weeks that followed, the disarmament began. Shipyards were converted to civilian use. Academies were shuttered. Monuments were torn down. The mighty human war machine, once the sword and shield of the council races, was methodically and mercilessly dismantled. Anthony watched it all with a bitter sense of inevitability. As the last gun was ripped from the last warship, he finally understood the council's true aim. It had never been about the Zorak, or even about human belligerence. It had always been about fear. Fear of human strength, human independence, human defiance. The council races, so ancient and proud, had looked into humanity's eyes and seen their own mortality reflected back, and they had recoiled, unable to bear the thought of a younger, more vital species rising to supplant them. And so they had conspired to break humanity's spine, to leave it a shackled and subservient client, too weak to ever challenge them again. The Zorak had been a pawn, a convenient catalyst for the Council's machinations. Earth would heal in time. Its cities would be rebuilt, its dead mourned and honored. But something fundamental had been lost, a piece of humanity's soul cut out and discarded. Anthony felt the weight of that loss as a physical ache in his chest. He had spent his life fighting for humanity's place among the stars, only to watch that dream crumble to ashes. In a final act of defiance, he gathered up his medals, his honors, every commendation and award he had earned in service to a council that had betrayed him. He sealed them in a capsule and launched it into the depths of space, a memorial to a legacy that would now fade into memory. As he watched the capsule disappear into the infinite black, he mourned not just for himself, but for the generations that would follow, the children who would grow up on an Earth shackled and diminished, never knowing the pride and glory of their past. The age of human ascendancy was over, smothered in its cradle by fearful old powers, desperate to cling to their dominion. The dream of a galaxy reshaped by human hands had died stillborn. And yet, as Anthony turned his face to the stars one last time, he could not quite surrender hope. The Council had won the day, but the future was long, and humanity's story was far from over. One day perhaps Earth would rise again. One day a new generation would take up the mantle he had been forced to lay down and finish the fight he had started. One day humanity would reclaim its destiny and shake the very heavens with its fury. He had to believe that. He had to believe that all the sacrifices, all the losses had not been in vain, that one day the galaxy would remember the name of Anthony Reyes and the indomitable spirit of the species he had championed. Until then he would endure, he would remember, and he would wait for the day when Earthmen once again dared to fight for their place among the stars. If you finished this story, please subscribe and like the video, then leave a comment that says, "I liked the story," and I will heart every single one of them. It really helps me. Thank you for your time.